Welcome to eDiscovery Leaders Live, where I get a chance to chat with luminaries in eDiscovery and related areas. This broadcast is sponsored by Reveal-Brainspace, the industry's leading AI eDiscovery platform. Don't forget to subscribe to watch me, George Socha, weekly with leaders in eDiscovery. Thank you for tuning in. Welcome to eDiscovery Leaders Live, hosted by ACEDS and sponsored by Reveal. I am George Socha. I head up brand awareness at Reveal. On each episode of eDiscovery Leaders Live, I get the chance to chat with luminaries in eDiscovery and related areas. Past episodes are available on the Reveal website. Go to revealdata.com, select resources, then select eDiscovery Leaders Live. Our guest this week is Michael Lalande. Michael is with the law firm of Davies, Ward, Phillips, and Vineberg, more easily said Davies, where he is eDiscovery Counsel in Toronto. Michael, welcome.
Thanks, George. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you. And I'll stick with Davies. It's so much easier to say it that way.
I still got to get the order when I'm putting in my email address. Is it PV or VP every single time? It's
yeah.
learning.
That it is. Well, I'd like you to start out, as I so often ask people to do, by telling us how it is that you got to where you are today.
Yeah. So I started off in criminal defense practice and got the opportunity to work on several cool murder trials, which is like the pinnacle in criminal defense, right? Is working on a murder trial. And throughout my trials, the opportunity to work with digital evidence was at the forefront and played a pivotal role in the assessment of the case and eventually how the case unfolded. We had one client that really stuck out where he had claimed that the person he had killed, allegedly, was sending him death threats and sending him a bunch of emails. And it was all through Tor browser, like it was a Tor email. And at the time, this was like over 15 years ago, no one really knew like what Tor emails were and like onion browsing and all that type of stuff. And so we ended up collecting this guy's computer and having a forensic expert go through it. And we found out on his desktop was a link to the Tor browser. And then just opening that up, we were able to find out that he was sending all these emails to himself. So he was trying to create like a paper trail as a defense mechanism to say, I was threatened, my life was threatened. And that really taught me to not always trust the client, but trust the data behind everything. Trust what the forensic experts are putting before you. And then we had another client who was alleged to have murdered his wife with a machete. And he was a university professor at a very esteemed university here in Canada. And I had to do a custodian interview with him in jail, face-to-face, because we needed to get his consent to get access to his university email addresses. And it was just the right timing where I got locked into a cell with him for over 4 hours because there was some inmate that got stabbed. And so here I am face-to-face with someone who allegedly murdered his wife with a machete, and he's got a pen in his hand and he's slamming it on the table for 4 hours. Very, very interesting experience. But after those two experiences and working on a large coroner's inquest where I had to deal with over 10,000 PDF documents that took over a week to print off, started to bring me into the eDiscovery sphere and starting to look into how do you handle this amount of data? Who are these forensic experts? And I was very intrigued by how data was collected, how it was processed, and how it was reviewed. So started to get into the eDiscovery sphere at that time. While I was also working at a criminal defense firm, I was also a duty counsel and would often do the midnight to 8 a.m. shift where I would pick up the phone, check a voicemail inbox every 2 minutes, and then go back to bed basically, and then keep checking it every 2 minutes. And when I was working in that job, one thing that really stuck out to me was I had to check that inbox every 2 minutes, and it was a pain in the butt. So instead of checking it every 2 minutes, I thought, what is the most efficient way to deal with that? And myself and other colleagues, we developed a script that would automatically dial on the computer, dial the hotline, and then if it was prompted to say that there was one message, we would get a text message to our phone. So instead of checking it every 2 minutes, we would just have text messages that would send us a notification saying, hey, you have a message on this line, you should go and check it. So instead of checking every 2 minutes, we were able to sleep for half an hour or 45 minutes and then get a text message. And then we developed it into a round robin where people would get assigned to that. But it was just thinking about those things from a different perspective, and an ounce of prevention is worth that pound of cure, I think is always the best way, especially with eDiscovery too. It's, yeah, you can do things over and over and over again, but if you can develop something that takes just as long amount of time to deal with the problem, but you're going to use it on all the pieces going forward, I think that is pivotal in eDiscovery is to always think about that. Like, how can we repeat this process in a more efficient way? A lot of these eDiscovery platforms have the automations built in now, which are fantastic. So when you load documents in, everything is processed and it runs through all the different steps, right? Versus before, it's all a manual process. So all those upbringings within criminal law, it also gave me a really good perspective on the clients. Right now at Davies and my previous firms that I've worked at and in consulting firms I've worked at, a lot of the clients are corporations. And you often don't get to see the faces of the individuals that you're dealing with. And I think working in criminal defense gave me that view of like the actual clients and what is at stake there, and that there's people involved with this, because we often lose sight to think that it's just a corporation, like no one's going to be hurt by this, but you have to always think about the people behind everything. So it gave me that view of who's standing behind the scenes and like the individuals in the corporations that are affected by this. So then once I learned about document review and eDiscovery, I dove deep into working for a document review provider here in Toronto and started doing first level review type work. And immediately I was blown away by eDiscovery and absolutely fell in love with it. And I was using a platform, I'm not going to say any platform names, but I was using a platform and they had a 200-page guide on how to use the platform. And the first week after I started using it as a first level reviewer, went back and read the entire manual to find out what are all the functions and features that are available. And that really pivoted me into the role that working into project management and then eventually an eDiscovery Counsel career. Based on the fundamental knowledge that I had and knowing what capabilities the platform had, I think going back and like reading that guide was one of the pivotal moments in my eDiscovery career, to know like that platform inside and out. And of course things changed, but having that base knowledge was fantastic. And I think one thing that really helped me get to where I am right now is the mentors and the leaders that I have always had. And I still today will talk to the mentors and leaders that have helped me come from where I am to where I am now, including the criminal defense lawyer that I used to work with. She would often sit in her bathtub every Saturday morning and read through the case law. And she taught me that is the pivotal thing to do as a lawyer, is to read the case law. That you may not be the best lawyer, but if you know the case law inside and out, people will respect you and you'll be a leader in that industry. And she would read through the Ontario reports and always know the up-to-date case law. So that's one thing I brought into my own practice. And I work with a fantastic group called DEED, where we will read the case law as soon as it comes out, digest it, and report it back to individuals. And I think that helps us stay cutting edge and keep above the curve, to know what is going on and what judges are saying, and help educate others. I think that's one of the key things I like to bring to the profession, is to educate people on eDiscovery. It's great that if you're an eDiscovery expert, but if you don't bring it back to the community, then I feel like you're leaving a lot on the table, right? Sorry, I've been doing a lot of talking, George.
That's okay. There are so many different directions we could go with this. I'd like, though, to wind back to the beginning, and the beginning of your time as a criminal defense attorney, because I recall from an earlier discussion you and I had in Toronto, you telling me how it is you came to work with that particular criminal defense attorney, which I think is a great story. If you can compress it a little bit and relate it, if nothing else, I think it's a very illuminating story.
Yeah, so part of how Ontario chooses their articling students is they have a session, like a set time where you have to apply for an articling position. And because I went to the University of Buckingham in England, I didn't fall into that time frame. So I missed the boat, and I had to wait almost another year to apply for an articling position. So I ended up knocking on doors of law firms to ask them for a position. And I made a list of all the criminal defense firms in a certain city, and I went to every single one. There was about 28 of them, and 27 of them said absolutely not. They were going to call the Law Society because I was outside of that time frame of when I had to apply by. And the last person that answered the door, she opened the door, asked me who I was and what I wanted. And I said, well, my name was Mike Lalande, and I wanted an articling position. And she said, I'm not hiring right now. Went to shut the door. I stuck my foot in the door. And because it was the last place, I said, you know what, hey, I didn't ask. I'm telling you, I want a job with you. And she sat me down, yelled at me profusely for 10 minutes, and then wondered why I hadn't left. And I said, well, it's because I'm in the military. I've been yelled at a lot, and so I could take a good yelling at. And while she was yelling at me, she was trying to access her emails, and they were only updating every half an hour. So she was missing all these emails. And she was slamming her keyboard down and going, why isn't this working? Why am I only getting emails every half an hour? And I switched it from POP to SMTP, and she instantly got her emails. And she was blown away by that. And she went, can you also handle my technology as well as being an articling student? I said, yeah, I can do that. And so that's where everything started. A little bit of technology helped me get into that articling position, and I worked for phenomenal counsel who was well respected and taught me everything from the base.
So you've gone from criminal defense work to working as eDiscovery counsel in a law firm to a position as a senior director at a service provider, back now as eDiscovery counsel in a law firm. You've got that experience in the military before all of this. What do those different pieces bring to the table to help you as you think about what processes you want to follow now, what your thoughts are about how eDiscovery should be handled?
Well, the Army was fundamental in my my upbringing because it always taught me to never pass a fault. And also the last regiment that I was a part of, called the Queen's Own Rifles of Canada, their motto was "In peace prepared." So I always take that learning forward with everything I do, so that if a matter is going to blow up, at least I'm prepared ahead of time. So always be prepared for the worst and expect the best is how I approach every single challenge. The other thing that the military did, and we had talked about earlier, George, was checklists. Military has checklists for everything that you do. When you wake up in the morning to go to bed at night, there's a checklist that applies for everything. There's timetables for everything. And so that forced me to create my own checklist. And for eDiscovery, I think checklists and pick lists are hugely impactful for people to not miss a step of the process and to keep people accountable, keep things transparent, and make sure that everyone that needs to be involved at every stage is involved. So I brought that forward when I worked at a eDiscovery law firm that was acquired by another law firm previously. And then also at the vendor side, checklists were fundamental. Like I said, they help everyone keep track of what is going on, who's assigned to what task. I think it's a nightmare when you don't have that in place, right? You have to have something that you work through. What cases are you working on? Working at a law firm and then to the vendor and then back to the law firm gave me a unique perspective. When I was working at the other law firm, they were one of the biggest law firms in Canada. So I got to work on all the biggest Canadian cases. I got to work with a fantastic team of individuals, widely regarded as one of the best eDiscovery firms in Canada, that was acquired by this firm. It was fantastic. It was the best experience I could have hoped for. But when I was working as a document reviewer, there was a different dynamic. There was different priorities. So a document review, everything was focused on documents per hour. How many hours are you going to put in? But when I was at the firm, it was all about standards and quality and thinking about the bigger picture, the broader eDiscovery elements, the whole EDRM, which I'm sure you're familiar with, George, being the creator. But that set me up on a good course. And developing workflows and having a repeatable process, I think, is fundamental to eDiscovery, because our clients are trusting that we're giving them similar work product, similar spreadsheets, similar budgets. Having that transparency and repeatability, I think, is vitally important. Then I jumped over to a service provider who is one of the, I think, largest users of various eDiscovery platforms in the world. And so working for one of the largest Canadian firms and then working for one of the largest eDiscovery providers was a fundamental shift, because here in Canada, I was working on cases with maybe 100 maximum reviewers to going to work with 500 plus reviewers, and then working on matters that span across the entire world. So the priorities and the complexity of those matters was out of this world. So one thing I took away from both working in the firm and working at the eDiscovery provider is, as I said, always be prepared. And no matter how small the case is, to do things in an organized fashion so that if it does blow up, things are set well at the base. And more often than not, I would get a call from a partner or from a client when I was at the consulting firm, and they say, it's just a small matter, it's just a couple thousand documents, and then we find something, and then it ends up being 1 million documents overnight because they collected an additional amount of data. And if you don't have that fundamental base set up, things weren't processed correctly, the database wasn't set up correctly, you just set it up haphazardly, then your whole base is thrown off, right? You have to start from scratch. So being prepared for the worst and having things set up, having your template set up in your review platform, and having things processed in a standard uniform way helps everything get flowing in the future. The vendor was also a very interesting experience for me, because working at this Canadian firm, I got to see what they did. But working at the vendor, I got to see what multiple firms were doing and across a global scale. So I got to see what worked well for them, what didn't work well for them, what were their pain points, and kind of took little pieces from all these various firms to go, oh, that's a really good way of reporting, or that's a really good way of communicating that information to individuals. So it gave me that unique perspective to see like the forest for the trees and see how everyone else does the reporting, and kind of going, this is the best way to do it. This is the most transparent way to do it. And it just gave me that invaluable experience to see like the best of the best law firms, how they were doing it, and to get that insight and knowledge. That brought me into Davies. In Davies, I keep referring to it as a classic car that just needs a new paint job. Like, they have a solid foundation here, an amazing team, but bringing in some of these workflows and bringing in some of the learnings that I've learned from my various employers is going to be fundamental into forward thinking. I think we received a presentation yesterday about how much data was created. I think they said that there was an uptick in the last year of 90% or something like that of the amount of data that's being created just in this past year. And I think everyone's seen that, like the amount of data, and I'm not going to belabor it because everyone knows that we're all creating so much data. But thinking about how to have everything set up at the good base is fundamental of what I'm trying to bring to Davies, is having everything set up, a well-oiled machine, so that when we do get that big influx of data or this massive matter, we're prepared for the worst and we'll expect the best, hopefully.
So your role, though, at Davies is not just to slap on a new coat of paint. It's broader. It's a transformational role, isn't it?
It is. At Davies, as most firms do, they try and segment eDiscovery underneath litigation, because they think it's only applicable to litigation. So trying to broaden that and provide it as a firm-wide resource and bring on new team members and new technologies that are innovative. This firm is extremely innovative and forward-thinking. And so from the eDiscovery perspective and the data perspective, working with this firm is a phenomenal opportunity. And I'm so excited to be here at Davies, because I feel like things are just blowing up. I don't know about you, but it feels like with ChatGPT and like what's going on in the world, it's a very interesting and exciting time in eDiscovery. And to be in the position that I'm in to help out with that it's amazing.
And it feels to me like the last time, from what I've done in eDiscovery, where there was this much, think of it as new possibilities, was probably in the early 1990s. long before most people dealing with eDiscovery ever even thought about or heard about eDiscovery. So it feels to me as if like there's enormous possibility. For folks who are at other law firms and either have a charge akin to yours or want to take on a charge such as yours, what advice do you have for them?
One of the best presentations that I ever watched in person was entitled eDiscovery Champions. And I think to make any sort of change within an organization, and an organization that's been doing something for so long and is ingrained in what they are doing, finding the champions who are excited about that within the firm, may it be within the eDiscovery group, or the law clerks, or the partners that are excited about new technology, and fostering those relationships and showing them these cool things of how to make their jobs and lives a lot easier. I think that's pivotal in the position that I'm in, to find and identify these people, because they're the ones that are going to go out and say to all the other partners and associates, hey, you're doing things in a backwards way. You want to see a cool way how I did it in 5 minutes? It's going to take you 5 hours. And they'll be blown away. And then they're the best people to sell the technology, sell the workflows, and to drive that efficiency across the board. So for anyone out there that's in the same position that I'm in, I'm sure you've found your eDiscovery champions, but I always like to identify those from the get-go and to work with those people and to always maintain those relationships.
So part of it is, of course, finding the eDiscovery champion. Part of what you must deal with, I mean, I imagine you have to deal with, is common in so many law firms. There will be people who are doing things the way they have done things. They've gotten the results they have gotten. They know what to expect. They might not be happy with the process, but it's a known process for them. You are trying to get them to make some changes, and sometimes some very big changes.
Mm-hmm.
Can't always say, and this is going to go from 5 hours to 5 minutes. It's not so dramatic always. What do you do?
So I like to phrase it in the way that, like, right now, when we're talking about the big data coming in and how much work we're going to have on our plates, I'm sure the team here at Davies has seen that influx of work that's coming through the door and how much stuff we have to do, and are realizing that there's only so many hours in a day. And so what I always go back to is having a efficient way that we tackle things is hopefully going to save us time, and hopefully going to save people's personal lives as well, right? Because we can hire 50 people, but that's not going to make or break it, right? It's going to be having the efficient process set up from the get-go will ensure that we're doing things in the most efficient way, and that people can save those hours, minutes. And yes, it may not be the way that we've always done it, but if there's a more efficient way that we can work with, then hopefully it can save them those hours and they can spend time with their family and friends, and they're not working nights and weekends, which I'm 99% of the people I work with in eDiscovery are often working on nights and weekends, because there's always a request on a Friday night of a long weekend that's going to come and be due Monday end of day. But it's having those processes in place, having the fallbacks, having people trained in a uniform way, and standardized processes, I think are fundamental, because having things done that way allows people to pick up the torch and say, you know what, go on vacation for a week. And that was one of the things I learned at my previous organization. And they were phenomenal for having individuals who were just there as respite. So that if you want to take a 3-week vacation, they had someone who would come in and cover your case for you. The only way that worked is if you set up your matter and you set up your case and you follow the workflow that the organization set forward, because then you could easily just hand it off and they can pick it up and go, yeah, I know how this case is being run. I know how these searchers are set up. I know how the workflow is operating, and they can jump into my shoes without me spending weeks trying to train them up on the matter. So I think it's fundamental to have that standardization. Just because things had worked well in the past, everyone has their own different workflows. That doesn't mean that someone can just pick up and go with that torch, right? So level setting and getting that standardization, I think, is fundamentally important to allowing people to enjoy their lives.
I hear echoes of checklist bouncing around the room. One of the things that you mentioned earlier was the new world and world of opportunities presented to us by ChatGPT and the like. As you're about to slam your foot in the door and make sure it doesn't shut on you with this, what are you looking forward to as the new possibilities?
I think the new possibilities are endless, right? Like it's trying to think about how we can use the technology, how we can leverage it, maybe using it to take notes in a meeting, create checklists for us, to using ChatGPT on individual matters or on a firm-wide basis to try and get the past learnings. I feel like the one thing that is shifting a lot in eDiscovery is not starting from scratch. A lot of platforms now have the pre-built models and can have the portability of models. And I think that's fantastic. I still think that not a lot of people are using those though, right? And they're starting from scratch every single time to build a privilege model, to build a relevance model, when they have previous cases that they can gather that information from and carry it forward. I think that's something that really excites me, is not having to start from scratch, because it always seems like this slow ramp up, especially for document review. You're starting from scratch and it takes weeks to try and get a stabilization, and then boom, you're finally there, and then the poop hits the fan because you're like, there's that many documents, now we need to ramp up a huge team. But not starting from scratch and having these pre-built models and having the ability to leverage the AI is fundamental, and I think it's gonna shift a lot of things.
From what you've been saying, I gather you've got a whole list of things you're looking to tackle next. What are some of the big challenges / opportunities that are on your plate right now?
Well, the biggest challenge is creating that standardization, right? Is creating those checklists and making sure that people are looking at these checklists. But I think the biggest opportunity is, yes, I've worked with other law firms, I've worked with other organizations, but I'm excited to work with the team that I have here and bring them in. And I keep saying to them, I want your input. I want your individualistic view. I have a checklist, and yeah, it may be 90% there, but it's not customized for how our lawyers work and how our firm operates. And the people that have been working here for over decades, they're fundamental to helping shape these checklists into something that's holistic, and that's something that will help them take time off their plates, versus being a barrier or a hurdle. And that's what often people think when they have checklists. They think, oh, you know what, someone's slamming this down my throat. It's an additional thing I have to do. My biggest challenge right now is to help show people this is good. Like, this is a good change. Like this makes your life a lot easier to follow this. And then, yeah, of course, you always have to think about the 95-5 rule, that it's going to apply to 95% of the cases, but there's always going to be those 5% outliers where this checklist is just not going to work. But in the 95% of the cases you're working on, it's going to be a good walkthrough for you. And so developing that customized workflow via like checklists and working with the team here, that's my greatest challenge and opportunity right now.
Well, Michael, thank you very much for joining us this week. Michael, and let me get the pronunciation properly this time of your last name.
Lalande.
Lalande. Très français, ça, non?
Ne parle en français.
Bon. Michael Lalande is eDiscovery Counsel with Davies up in Toronto. I am George Socha. This has been eDiscovery Leaders Live, hosted by ACEDS and sponsored by Reveal. Michael, thanks so much for joining us this week.
Thank you, George, and thank you, ACEDS, for hosting.